Hey everyone, welcome to this crash course lecture on using your command line. Before we install anything, including Python, it's actually really important to have a very quick overview of how to work at your command line. And the command line basically allows you to programmatically move through your computer's directories. That way, you can run Python scripts at your command line. What we're going to cover in this short lecture is how to find your current directory, how to list all the files in a directory, how to change a directory, and then how to clear the command line screen. Something you need to understand though is that the commands are going to be slightly different depending on what your operating system is. So for macOS and Linux users, go ahead and jump to this time in the video in order to go through your set of instructions. If you're a Windows user, go ahead and jump to this time stamp at the video to jump to your specific instructions. And then once you've gone through your command line crash course, go ahead and move on to the next lecture. Again, this is just because the commands are slightly different for Linux and macOS users versus Windows users. Okay, go ahead and jump to the correct timestamp and we'll meet back there. Alright, so let's go over the Windows command line operations. At your computer, to find the command prompt, all you need to do is search for the term CMD, and you should be able to find command prompt as the best match. If command prompt doesn't show up when you search CMD, instead just search for the whole phrase, command prompt, and then you should see command prompt desktop app. Once you've opened up your command prompt, you should see something that looks like this. Let's start off by finding out where are we currently located. Basically, what's our current directory? I can use the command line to interact with my computer, but to actually perform those interactions, I need to know where I'm at on my computer. You can think of this as basically programmatically moving around through files and folders on your computer. You can type out CD, hit enter, and this will report back your current directory. Now you'll notice the command prompt actually basically gives you the file path of where you already are, but sometimes if the file path is really long or you're dealing with more complex things like virtual environments or installations, it's always a good idea to check your current directory by typing CD. Sometimes things like the Anaconda prompt will have other directories in parentheses. You can always confirm your current directory by typing out CD, hit enter, and that reports back where you are. So I can see right now I'm under this particular user's folder. If I wanted to figure out what all the files and folders located in my current directory were or are, I can type dir, hit enter, and that reports back the contents of my directory. I can see here that there's the desktop, documents, downloads, as well as some hidden files denoted by starting with a dot. But basically, this is everything that's in this folder, C users Marcial. I can scroll down, see CSV files, pictures. Now let's imagine I wanted to actually move into one of these subfolders. What I can do is type CD and then the name of that folder. For example, if I wanted to change directories to my desktop location, I can type CD, change directory, space, and then desktop, hit enter, and now I'm at my desktop. And I can type CD to confirm that I'm at my desktop. If I want to go back up a directory, all I need to do is type CD, space, dot, dot, or period, period, hit enter, and now I've moved back up a directory. Now you don't actually need to type in the entire file path if you're moving around. What you can do is say CD, begin typing, such as the letter D, then hit tab, and you should be able to see it autocomplete for you. So as I hit tab, I get the various options of everything that starts with a capital D. So I can go to documents, hit enter, and then if I wanted to see all my documents, I can type dir, and we can see all our documents here. Again, if I want to go back, CD space dot dot, and if I ever want to clear my entire command line screen, I can type CLS, and I've cleared the entire screen. All right, that's really all the basics we need to know for right now. Just to review, CD for current directory, dir to list everything in my directory, CD and then the name of the folder that I want to jump to. For example, if I want to go to downloads, CD downloads. Again, you can hit tab to autocomplete. And if we ever want to jump back up, CD dot dot. And if we ever want to clear the screen, it's CLS. That's the basics you need to know. We'll see you at the next lesson where we discuss how to install Python. Alright, so let's go over the macOS and Linux command line operations. And your command line in macOS and Linux is known as a terminal. So these commands work on both of these operating systems the exact same way. Let's get started. To begin working with the command line on a Linux or Mac OS, you first need to open up your terminal. Search your computer for terminal, either on Mac OS or Linux, it's called the same thing, and then open up your terminal. You should eventually get something that looks like this. The colors or font may be slightly different, but the basic idea is the same. The terminal gives you a command line interface, and the command line interface allows you to move around different files or folders on your computer. And with some more advanced functionality, you can also make new directories or remove directories. We don't really need to know that right now. All we really need to know is how to understand what our current working directory is, change directories, and just move around. This basically allows us to move around the computer at the command line. The first thing we want to know is where we're currently located. To know that, type pwd, hit enter, and this will print your working directory. This is where you're currently located at the command line. If you want to understand what files and folders are located at your current location, type ls and then hit enter, and you should see a list of different files and folders at your current directory. If you ever want to move to one of those files or folders, what you can do is type cd and then whichever file or folder you want to go to. However, it should be in the list that was just printed. For example, let's move to our desktop. So I will come back down here and type cd desktop, hit enter, and now if I type pwd and I hit enter again, I'm now at my desktop. If you ever want to clear your screen, just type clear, hit enter, and now you've been able to clear your command line. If you ever want to go back up a directory, it's just cd space ... hit enter, and now we're back up a directory, which I can confirm by typing pwd. That's really all we need to know as far as the commands are concerned. Let's have a quick review. To print your working directory, it's pwd, and this reports back where you're currently located. If you want to know the files and folders at your current location, type ls, and this will list all the files and folders. If you want to clear your command screen, type clear, hit enter, and this will clear your command line. If you want to change directory to a subfolder, type cd, and then you can even begin typing the name, such as desktop, and if I just hit desk and then hit tab, it should autocomplete. If you do not get an autocomplete by hitting tab, that's probably a good indicator that it's not a direct subfolder of your current directory. But then you can type cd, the name of the subfolder or subdirectory, and then we can see now we're located here by typing pwd. If you ever want to go back up, type cd space ... Okay, that's the basics of moving around through the command line. We're going to be using that later on when we run Python scripts at the command line. We'll see you at the next lesson where we discuss how to actually install Python onto your computer. Welcome everyone to this lecture where we're going to walk through the process step by step of installing Python with the free Anaconda distribution. Now, there are many ways to actually run Python code, and we have another lecture later on called Running Python Code, where we're going to be exploring the difference between running a python.py script or running Python code in a notebook environment such as Jupyter Notebook. Either way, before we actually learn how to run that Python code, we still need to install Python locally on our computer. So, in this installation lecture, we're going to do the following. First, and the main thing about the lecture, is we'll install Anaconda distribution for Python. The Anaconda distribution is going to install the Python programming language and an easy-to-use development environment and Navigator launch tool. That's why for this course, we choose the Anaconda distribution instead of just going to python.org and only downloading Python. The Anaconda distribution will install the language and a bunch of really useful tools, especially if you're a beginner in programming. Then we're going to briefly run Jupyter Notebook, the development environment we use throughout the course. Keep in mind though, we'll have later lectures that dive much deeper into the details of actually programming and running Python code. This is mainly an installation lecture. After all that, we'll explore these no install online options. So a quick note on these no install options. There are actually now many online, no installation necessary Python environments that can be run directly in the browser. So as long as you have an internet connection, you actually don't need to install anything. You can just visit a website and run Python code. While these are not officially part of the course, because these websites can change and sometimes go from a free plan to a paid plan, we are going to give you a brief tour of these online no install options at the very end of this installation lecture, just to give you an idea of what's out there. To begin, we're going to install Python with the free individual Anaconda distribution. It's actually free and open source. There's nothing you need to pay for here. And as I mentioned, this distribution includes Python as well as many other useful libraries, including the Jupyter Notebook environment, which is where we do our coding in this particular course. And Anaconda can also be easily installed on any major operating system, Windows, Mac OS, or even Linux. To begin, we have to first go to the downloads website. You can go to www.anaconda.com/downloads, and it should take you to the individual product download page, or you can just do a Google search for Anaconda download, and it should take you to that page as well. I'm going to head over to my browser and go to anaconda.com/downloads, which should redirect me to the individual downloads page. Okay, here I am at Google, and what you can do is just search Anaconda download, hit enter, and it should take you to anaconda.com products individual. And this is the download page we're looking for, the individual edition. Or if you directly type in anaconda.com/download, it should also redirect you to this page. Keep in mind, Anaconda does change the look of this page from time to time. So at a certain point in the future, it may look slightly different to you, but overall, there should be some sort of download and install option on this page. The individual edition is free and open source. There's nothing you need to pay for. And you'll notice that eventually there's going to be a download button on this page. What you do is you can just scroll down here. It's going to talk about the various aspects that are included with Anaconda. Really, it's not just the Python programming language, although that's definitely the biggest part of it. It includes a bunch of libraries and really useful tools, especially if you're just a beginner. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scroll down until I get to the Getting Started with Anaconda section and the Anaconda installers, which is really what we're looking for here, this Anaconda installers, and it's probably going to be at the bottom of the page. Also, if you just scroll all the way back up here and click download, it will automatically take you to the installer section. Now, depending on your operating system, you'll want to download the Windows installer, Mac OS installer, or the Linux installer. It's kind of up to you depending on which operating system you're actually running. Now, I am running a modern Windows 10 software, and if you're running a just relatively recently made computer, you're probably going to want to install the 64-bit graphical installer. If you're on an extremely old computer, you may want to check if you have a 32-bit graphical installer, but it's highly likely that if you're on a modern computer, you're just going to be installing the 64-bit graphical installer. If you are on Mac OS, install or download the graphical installer, not the command line installer. There's technically the same thing, but graphical installer comes with an easy-to-use Windows that's going to match up with exactly what we show on the Windows installer. And if you're on Linux, you can download the 64-bit installer here. Okay, since I am on a Windows computer, I'm going to click and download the 64-bit graphical installer. And once you click on that, it should begin the download, and it will also take you to a thank you for downloading web page, which you can pretty much ignore. There's a little getting started here, which is a 12-minute tutorial. You may want to take a look at that. There's also a documentation quick start guide where you can click learn more, and it takes you to this user guide about Anaconda of some more details. But really, what we're going to talk about is just the installation part in this lecture. In fact, if you click on that user guide, you can click on installation, and it has written out step-by-step instructions for installing on Windows, installing on Mac OS, or installing on Linux. So depending on what operating system you have, if you really want step-by-step written out directions, you can go to docs.anaconda.com/anaconda/install, and it will take you to the documentation for a variety of setups, which we're really just going to show here. And again, there's not too many steps here. You just click next and click all the defaults and hit I agree. Let me fast forward until this executable file is done downloading so we can walk through the installation procedure together. Once it's running, what we're going to do is set up Anaconda. So we'll click on Next here, go ahead and agree to the license agreement, and then depending on whether or not you have admin permissions on your computer, you could do just me or all users. I'll do just me, and then I'm going to install it here under Anaconda 3. I would also suggest that you use the default destination folder. Alright, and here's a very important step for Windows users. You'll notice it has this checkbox and it says that it's not recommended to check it. If this is your first installation of Python and you intend to use this distribution of Anaconda as your main source for actually running Python code, then I would actually recommend that you install it and add it to your path environment variable. Basically what this means is that if you were to open up the Windows command prompt and type Python, it would come first and search for the Anaconda version of Python before looking at any other pre-installed Python. And if you're following along this course and you intend to use this as your main distribution, then we actually do recommend adding Anaconda 3 to my path environment variable. If later on and you decided not to check this box and want to add it to your path, what you can do is open up Anaconda 3 with the Windows Start menu and then select Anaconda 64-bit, and then this Add to Path option will essentially be the same thing as clicking this box here. For simple use cases, I actually do recommend that you click this box, so I will go ahead and click that box and just add it to my path environment variable since I want Anaconda 3 to be found first. So then we'll hit install. And my Anaconda installation is now complete, so I will go ahead and click next. And you'll notice it says working with Python and Jupyter Notebooks is a breeze with PyCharm Professional, etc. We don't actually need to worry about installing PyCharm. It's just another development environment option for you. There's pretty much a wider range of environments you can choose from. We'll be using the Anaconda and Jupyter environment just because we feel that is the most accessible to someone learning Python for the first time, and it's free and open source. So we'll go ahead and skip this little kind of advertisement there. And then what we're going to do is we're also just going to skip the tutorial and then skip learning more about Anaconda. Those are actually the first two links that we showed you earlier. And then hit finish, and you should be good to go. Okay, now that we've finished installing Anaconda, let's show you the two ways to run it. One is through the Anaconda Navigator. To do this, search your computer for Anaconda Navigator. So I'm going to search for Anaconda Navigator. So I'm going to open up the Anaconda Navigator app, and you may need to run this as an administrator on some computers, specifically on some work computers, but go ahead and open up and click on Anaconda Navigator in order to run the application. Upon clicking that, you should see it beginning to initialize, and sometimes this takes a while, especially on the first time you're running Anaconda Navigator, so be patient while it loads, but eventually you should see this graphical interface pop up for Anaconda Navigator. Okay, here we are at Anaconda Navigator. It'll ask you whether or not you want to send reports to Anaconda. Feel free to send the reports or not send the reports. I'm just going to hit OK here. And right now it's loading a little bit more content. And there we go. So now we have Anaconda Navigator, which is essentially a graphical interface for the various development environments that Anaconda comes with. You'll notice that it has Jupyter Lab, Jupyter Notebook, a PowerShell prompt for you, as well as Qt Console, Spider, GlueViz, Orange 3, and even RStudio. So Anaconda is essentially packaged not just Python, but a bunch of development environments for you. For the course in general, we are using Jupyter Notebook, not Jupyter Lab, although it's extremely similar, but Jupyter Notebook. Just something to keep in mind. All right, now before we actually launch Jupyter Notebook, what I want to do is finish this tour of Anaconda Navigator. On the left-hand side, you see the Home tab. There is also the Environments tab. Environments, in this case, actually stands for virtual environments, which you may be familiar if you've programmed before. It essentially allows you to create a little virtual environment separate from your base environment to install particular versions of libraries. We'll talk about this later on in the course. You can see that I have some environments already. You should probably just have your base root environment and maybe one more, like a new environment. But for right now, you can go ahead and ignore and skip this tab. And finally, there's the Learning and Community tabs. Learning is just a bunch of links to documentation and some training videos you can check out. It's really leaning really heavily towards data science and machine learning because Anaconda is really popular with that community. And speaking of community, you can click on the Community tab, and it's a bunch of links to events and forums you can check out. Again, highly skewed towards data science and machine learning. Let's come back home. And once you're home, what you're going to do is hit the Launch button underneath Jupyter Notebook. We won't be working with Jupyter Lab for now. It's really similar, but for right now, Jupyter Notebook is the simpler of the two. It's easier to get started with Jupyter Notebook. So click on Launch on Jupyter Notebook. It's going to load for a little bit, but then it's going to redirect you to a Jupyter Notebook in your browser. And don't be alarmed if you notice it automatically opens your default browser. We highly recommend Chrome as your default browser when working with Jupyter Notebook, so you can check that out, but it should automatically open the default browser on your computer. So for example, you can see off screen, it actually did this for me. It went ahead and opened up Jupyter. So Jupyter does not require the internet to run. It's just using your browser as a visual interface for you to write code in. And you notice that it's typically going to launch in your C drive or in your main user drive, depending if you're using Windows or Mac OS, in which case you should see a directory of all your folders and files. So notice in my C drive, I can see my desktop folders, documents, downloads, etc. So then if I click on one of these, like desktop, it actually shows me everything I have underneath my desktop folders and different files there. I can come back up, and this is essentially allowing me to explore files and folders across my computer, whether they're in documents, downloads, favorites, games, music, etc. What I can also do is create new folders and new notebook files from here as well. Let's quickly explore that. I can click on New, and you'll see the option for a new notebook and the option to create a new folder, as well as a terminal connection and text file. We'll ignore those for now. We can click on New Folder, and if you click on New Folder, it should create a new untitled folder, essentially at the bottom of this list of folders. So if you scroll down here, eventually you should see something that says like Untitled Folder created just a few seconds ago. And then if you open it, it's completely empty. So this would allow you to actually create notebooks inside. So it says the notebook list is empty because this is just an empty folder. What I can do then is I could come back up a directory, scroll down and rename this folder. I can click the checkbox here, Untitled Folder, and if you scroll up, it'll say, do you want to rename it? So let's go ahead and rename it. Let's call it My Python Stuff. Hit Rename. And now let's open it up again. So it says My Python Stuff. I'm going to open up My Python Stuff. It says the notebook list is empty. Let's create our first notebook. Notebook is what we're actually going to be writing code in. I will select New. It says Notebook, hit Python 3, and this will automatically launch and connect to a new notebook. We're going to be discovering notebooks in a lot more detail later on in the course when we talk about running Python code, but just as a really quick tour of what a Jupyter Notebook is, it's essentially an environment where there's individual cells where you can write Python code. Let's run our very first piece of Python code just using Python as a calculator. I will say 1 plus 1. And then what I can do is I can run this cell. I could say cell, run cells, and it will run this cell with the input as 1 plus 1 and the output as 2. I can also type in, or actually do Shift Enter. I'm not just typing it in, this is just to show you what I'm about to do. If I hit Shift Enter on my keyboard, it will run this cell and then create a new cell underneath it. So I'm going to do Shift Enter on my keyboard again. It runs the cell and creates a new cell underneath it. This is the main way we're going to be learning how to program throughout the course. Keep in mind, we do show you how to run .py scripts using something like a text editor like Sublime Text to give you the option of running Python code however you prefer. But for the majority of the course, we use notebooks because it allows us to write notes and just organize our data and learn better using Python. And all the course notes are organized in notebooks. In fact, if you go back to the very first lecture of the course or check your automated welcome message, as well as the Q&A forums, you'll see that we have this Purion Data link with the Complete 3 or Complete Python 3 bootcamp with all the sections and notebooks that correspond to those sections. So I can click on something, for instance, like the Milestone Project 1, click on Warm-Up Project Exercises, and these are notebooks hosted on GitHub for you, and later on we'll actually show you how to download these notebooks. But you can see that the notebooks allow you to post images, post explanatory text, and code all in one single interface. This is why they're so useful for learning Python for the very first time. And we're going to talk a lot more about using Jupyter and running code later on. But for right now, you should have been able to create your first notebook, run some code, and keep in mind, there's a whole help tab here for a user interface tour. This user interface tour, super helpful. If you just click on it, it actually takes you through a kind of left and right code tour on file names and stuff you can do within the notebook. So I highly recommend you actually just click help and take that user interface tour now before heading on to the next lecture. Once we're done with this notebook, we can simply close this tab. Notice the notebook is actually still running, noted by the green little icon. You can simply check the box and shut down the notebook. If you shut down the notebook, the code and text is all saved there, but it's not deleted. If you do want to delete this notebook completely from your computer's memory, check the box and then hit this little trash icon. And then it's going to say, hey, do you want to permanently delete this notebook? Go ahead and hit delete. And now it's permanently removed. Same thing for the folder. If you go back up a directory and for some reason you will now want to delete this MyPython stuff folder, simply check this box, scroll back up here and hit the trash can icon. It's going to ask you, do you want to permanently delete this folder? Keep in mind, Jupyter only allows you to delete folders that are completely empty. This is a safety concern. That way you don't accidentally delete a whole folder permanently. Go ahead and click delete here, and you should have been able to delete that folder. All right. So in this lecture, we were already able to install Anaconda, launch Anaconda Navigator, and launch our very first Jupyter Notebook. Coming up next, we're going to discuss how to run Python code, both as a .py script and within the Jupyter Notebook. To end this lecture, I did mention there were some no installation options. We're going to do a very brief tour of this if you're interested. If not, go ahead and move on to the next lecture. Let's give you a brief tour of all the no install options available on the internet at this time. Alright, so let's quickly check out some no installation options. The ones we're going to cover just briefly here are the official try option from jupyter.org/try. That will actually allow you to run a Jupyter Notebook with nothing to install directly in your browser. Then we'll also check out Google Colab online notebooks. You do need a Google account like a Gmail address in order to access those, but it's a pretty cool feature provided by Google. And then we'll also check out Replit or repl.it. And that's a website that allows you just to write some Python code, have it interpreted, and run. I should mention there are dozens of these sort of websites, and you can find them by just doing a quick Google search for Python interpreter online, and you'll get a ton of options, including the ones shown here. But for a very brief note, why would you not want to just use one of these options instead of installing something locally? For one thing, it can be hard to upload your own code, data, or notebooks on one of these free no installation options. And also, sometimes they have the free tier that doesn't save your code, and then you have to actually pay in order to have your code save and run on their service. So keep that in mind. And then the third thing is, we're not officially supporting any of these no installation options as part of this course, since they could change in the future. All right, I'm going to head over to my browser and just give you a brief tour of these options. Okay, the first option is jupyter.org/try. It's essentially the exact same thing I just showed you locally, but hosted here for free on the cloud. So you can try the classic Python notebook. You can also try it with things like R and JupyterLab to try it out. You click on Try Classic Notebook, and it's going to upload just a temporary instance of a Jupyter Notebook. I actually often use these when I don't want to run Jupyter Notebook locally, and I do want to run just a quick piece of Python code and have this run a temporary cloud-hosted Jupyter Notebook. Nothing you put here is actually going to get saved, so keep that in mind. It's just a temporary notebook being hosted in the cloud. All right, so once that's fully loaded, it's going to look something like this. This is essentially a Jupyter Notebook. It's going to tell you your memory limits. Keep in mind, locally, you obviously don't have memory limits like this. It's just the memory limit of your computer's RAM or hard drive space. You can just insert a new cell or say insert cell below. Here's the new cell. Type in something like 1 + 1 or print 1 + run, and then run these cells, and you'll get to see the output. And this is jupyter.org/try. Really nice to just quickly run a notebook hosted online. And nothing here is actually going to get saved permanently. You can click save, and it will save your changes, but you can't come back to this website and expect your notebook to be here. Another option for downloading it here is, if I zoom out just a little bit, you can click here on File, Download As. You can download this as a notebook, Markdown, LaTeX, HTML, tons of options here. There's even JavaScript slides, reveal.js if you're familiar with that, but that allows you to download it locally in case you really wanted to save any changes there. Okay, I'm going to close out of this option. Next option is Google Colab Notebooks. This is a free notebook service from Google, really focused on machine learning and data science, and you do need a Gmail account to access this. Go ahead and just Google search Google Colab Notebooks and then go to collab.research.google.com, and you can click on one of these already pre-made notebooks, or you can click on New Notebook, and it takes you to this new Google Colab Notebook. And here, what's really cool, if you have a Gmail account, it will actually save your notebook and you can do things like load up data to a Google Drive. The downside is it's not exactly a Jupyter Notebook, it's kind of a specialized Google version of it, but you can say something like 1 plus 1 here, click run or hit shift enter, and it's going to run that code and then output the results. And actually right now it's connecting and initializing. Now that it's connected, you can see it ran to here, 1 plus 1. You are limited on your RAM and disk space, but there's a paid tier in case you decide to do really huge machine learning or deep learning data sets later on in your Python career. This could be an option for you. Now I'm going to close this one. Last one I want to show you is this Repellent. It's a browser-based IDE. It is collaborative and do have a free tier you can check out. So if you click on Start Coding, you do have to make an account, log in, and sign up. And if you check out the pricing on this, there is a starter edition that's totally free. So if you want, you can use this. Doesn't give you a whole lot of CPU power though compared to something locally, so keep that in mind. And really it's kind of meant for collaborative coding environments. And if you go back here to the Google search of Repellent, you'll notice there's a little Python link here. And you can click here, go to repellent/languages/python3, and you should be able to actually just kind of give it a little test run. So I can do something like print 1 plus 1, hit run here, and it's going to give me the output 2. Again, there's limits here. Nothing's going to get saved unless you make an account, log in. For the best experience with this course, I do recommend that you work with a local installation. It's much easier to follow along that way, but I do want to give you some options in case you're on a computer where for some reason you don't have full admin permissions to install anything. Okay, with that being said, let's move on to the next lecture and really dive into running Python code. I'll see you there. Welcome back, everyone. By now, we've learned about the command line basics, and we also have installed Python onto our computer. It's time to actually run our first piece of Python code. Before we do that, I want to discuss the several different ways you can run Python code and the various options there are for developing environments for Python. And there's 3 main types of environments, and what I mean by environments is the actual thing you're going to be typing Python code into. And the 3 options are text editors, full IDEs, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, and then there's notebook environments. So let's start off with text editors. Text editors are just general editors for any text file. And that is to say they're designed in a general format where they can open a .text file, a .py script, a .html file, a .js file for JavaScript, just any variety of file types. You'll be able to open them up and edit them. And they can also be customized with plugins and add-ons. And because of that, and their general format, they actually aren't designed with only Python in mind. So you're going to sacrifice a little bit of Python-specific functionality. Things like autocomplete for Python or looking up things in the documentation automatically for Python. Those typically won't be included directly with the text editor. Instead, you'll have to download them with a plugin or some other add-on for text editors. Keep in mind, there's tons of plugins out there, and Python is such a popular programming language that you can pretty much find any plugin you want already created for you for the text editors you're working with. And the most popular text editors on the market are Sublime Text and Atom, and those are both free. Technically, Sublime Text is an unlimited use free license that you can eventually pay for if you like the product. Atom is an open source text editor from GitHub, which is completely free and it's open source. And later on in this lecture, we'll be showing you how to download Sublime Text and running Python scripts with Sublime Text. So that's one option, the text editor. Another really popular option, especially if you're working at a company, is a full integrated development environment. And these are development environments that are designed specifically for use cases with Python. And they're larger programs. What I mean by larger is that it's a larger file size. The text editors from before, those are actually very lightweight programs that you end up adding more and more to them as you want more plugins. IDEs, they come with everything already, so they have larger programs. And because they're IDEs, it means there's actually a team of developers or a company behind it being paid to add new features to the environments. And because of that, there's typically a pro version and a community version where only the community edition is free, and the pro version that has more features, maybe they'll have more features for Django web frameworks or web development help, those you have to pay for. The community editions are free, however. And the pro about this is that they're designed specifically for Python. They have lots of extra functionality to help with your Python code. But they are a little more bloated, a little larger, and it kind of depends on what your workflow style is, if you like this approach or not. The most popular IDEs for Python are probably PyCharm, that's definitely the biggest one out there, and then Spyder is another popular one. Spyder is really popular for people coming in from MATLAB into Python. Finally, let's talk about notebook environments. And notebook environments is the environment we're going to be using for the majority of this course. Later on, we'll move away from notebooks and move towards larger scripts. But to start off with, we'll go with the notebooks, and that's because, in my opinion, they're really great for learning. And the main thing here is that you get to see your input code and your output of the code right next to each other, and you get to see multiple inputs and multiple outputs all in one nice notebook. And this is because notebooks use blocks of code that are referred to as cells. So you can split up your code into different cells and then run pieces of your code by running individual cells, and you get to immediately see the output. That's different than the approach taken with a text editor or development environment where you have to develop kind of a larger script first and then run that script at the command line. That's really great when you do have larger pieces of code that need to interact with each other, but when you're just starting off, you kind of want to quickly be able to type something in and see the output, which is why a notebook environment is really great for learning. The other things that differentiate a notebook environment is that they support inline markdown notes. So you can write yourself different pieces of notes. So just normal text is what we mean by markdown notes. And actually the notebooks we provide for this course have a lot of explanatory text for you. So you essentially get a book along with the videos that go with this course. And they also support things like visualizations, images, videos, and a lot more. And because they support all these extra things, they actually have their own special file format that are not a .py script. And because of that, typically if you see a .py script on your computer, you can double click on it and some sort of text editor will automatically open the .py script. Because notebooks are able to support all this extra stuff, they have their own notebook format, which is extension .ipynb, that stood for IPython notebook. And because of that special format, you can't actually double click on a notebook file. You need to launch it using the Jupyter Notebook launcher. So the Jupyter Notebook is pretty much the most popular, and it's almost the only notebook environment for Python because of how popular it is. But it's getting more and more popular, especially in fields of data science and machine learning, because you can see visualizations and your code input right next to the output. So we're going to be using that at first to start learning. But the most important note here is that development environments are actually a very personal choice, and it's really highly dependent on your personal preference. So if Python's not your first language and you're already used to using Sublime Text Editor, or maybe you've already used PyCharm at work and you have the pro version there, and you want to prefer to use those development environments, please feel free to do so. All the code we show is going to work in any development environment that you choose. So really, after you see this lecture, choose whichever development environment you prefer. We provide the notes as .ipynb files, but you can easily convert them or download them as HTML files or .py scripts, and all the code we show in the videos runs the same regardless of what environment you're using. Okay, so let's now explore how to run Python code. We're first going to start with an editor, so we'll download the Sublime Text Editor, and we'll show you how you can create a simple .py script and run the file at your command line. Then we're going to show how to run the same code with a Jupyter Notebook. So to do all this, we first need to download Sublime Text Editor. So go to www.sublimetext.com and we'll see you there. All right, here we are at sublimetext.com, and typically it will auto-detect what operating system you're on, and it will have a little button for you saying download for OS, Linux, or Windows. It's a very simple text editor, and it's probably the most popular text editor in the world. And it has a really interesting pricing scheme. It's technically not free, but they give you an unlimited free trial where they will just have a little pop-up every once in a while asking you if you're ready to upgrade to buy it. So again, it's technically not free, but it has an unlimited free trial for the rest of your life. It will just have a little pop-up asking you to purchase the full license. So click here on download and then select the download for your operating system, either OS X, Windows 64-bit, or Linux. So typically what you should do is just go to the home page and then click whatever download that it auto-detected for you. Once you've downloaded it, we'll go ahead and open the Sublime Text Editor. Once you've downloaded and installed Sublime Text, you should be able to search your computer for Sublime Text, click on it, open it up, and it will look something like this. Next, what we're going to do is actually type out some Python code and then save this as a .py script. Go ahead and type print, open and close parentheses, and then in single quotes or double quotes, hello world. And this will be your first Python script. and then select File, Save As. And the reason we're doing that is if you notice, right now, there's no syntax highlighting. That is to say, everything is the same color for this font. So Sublime Text Editor doesn't actually know that this is a Python script. What we want to do is save it as, and we're going to call this file my example. And you'll notice if you click on all files, you have lots of extensions to choose from. We're going to choose to save it as a Python file. So you're going to say my example, save it as a Python file. The other option you can do is just select all files and then say my example and yourself write .py. Either way is fine. Go ahead and save it, making sure it's a .py file. Hit save. And now you'll notice Sublime Text Editor understands that it's a Python script file, and it's performed syntax highlighting to help you read this. Print is a function, hello world is a string. And we're going to be learning a lot more about that and Python in general later on in your training. For now, let's see how to actually run this script. Remember that we've saved it to our desktop, meaning at our command line, we need to change directories to our desktop so we can run this actual .py file. Go ahead and open up your command line. Since I'm on Windows, I will open up a command prompt. If you're on Mac OS or Linux, you'll open up a terminal. Then you'll want to change directory to your actual desktop or wherever you saved this .py file. So type cd and then desktop to change directory to your desktop. And then what you should be able to do is type out Python space and then begin typing out the name of your file. In my case, it was example.py. And to prove to yourself that we're in the correct location, you should be able to hit tab and it will autocomplete. So here we say Python myexample.py, and this is how you can run a .py script at your command line. Hit enter, and you should be able to see hello world. Now you successfully created a Python script in your text editor, and you ran that script at your command line. What you can also do is just type Python by itself at your command line, hit enter, and this is a very simple direct connection to Python, allowing you to type Python code directly at your command line. We won't really be using this throughout your training because it's only one line at a time, and eventually we'll be using and learning about writing more than one line at a time for code. But you can also just check it out, type print hello, enter, and you'll notice you have hello as the output. So this is basically one line at a time. You can write Python code. Then we can type quit, open and close parentheses, hit enter, and we've quit out of the Python interpreter. All right, so we just learned how to actually run a Python script at your command line. Now let's explore the Jupyter Notebook environment and see how that works. To do so, we'll go to our Anaconda Navigator. So search your computer for Anaconda Navigator, open that up, and then once you've done that, go ahead and launch the Jupyter Notebook. Once you click on that launch button, you should notice that your browser automatically opens up to localhost either 8888 or 8889 or some other series of numbers. Keep in mind that while Jupyter Notebook does operate inside of your browser, it does not require an internet connection. Everything is happening locally. There's no internet connection between Jupyter and some other server somewhere. It just happens to open up and operate in your browser as a convenient graphical interface for you to program in. So once you launch Jupyter Notebook, you'll notice that you can view all the files on your computer. For example, we can click here on the desktop folder, and now I can see that my example.py script we had just created earlier. And using the Jupyter Notebook system, you can actually add on and edit .py files. So for example, we could add on another print statement here, new, and then save this change. So we could say save, and then we could also download or rename the file and a bunch of other stuff. But we're not going to be using Jupyter for this sort of text editing. It's probably better to use Sublime Text Editor, but again, it's personal preference. What we're really going to be using Jupyter for is the notebook system. So you can click here where it says new, and under notebook, you should see Python 3. Sometimes it says conda root or something else, but click on what it says under Notebook. Typically it says Python 3. And then you'll notice that we just started a new notebook. So let's have a quick overview of what this actually is. Here it says untitled, and that's because this notebook that we just created doesn't actually have a title. And if we click back here to this other tab, you'll notice we just created an untitled.ipynb file. That stands for IPython notebook file. Jupyter Notebooks used to be called IPython notebooks, so they kept the file extension name. And if we want to change this name, all we have to do is go back to this tab, select untitled, and give our notebook a new name. So we will say my first notebook, hit enter, and we've renamed the notebook as well as the actual file. You'll notice now it says my first notebook.ipython notebook extension. So coming back to this notebook, the notebook uses a cell-based system, meaning you write code in a cell, you run the cell, and then see the actual output right below the cell. So let's try running our simple print statement. Inside of a cell, type print, open close parentheses, hello, and you'll notice that Jupyter auto-completes some things for you, such as quotes or parentheses. And then we can run this cell. So you can click here on the run button, and it will run this cell, and you will see the output directly below. This is a great system for people who are just starting to learn about Python because they can quickly iterate and fix mistakes because they have their code and they can see the output directly. They don't have to be constantly going to the command line and running their scripts. Again, it's definitely a personal preference, but this is a nice feature of the notebook for people that are learning Python. And you'll notice that we automatically create another cell below, which you can type more Python code in. For example, print new. And if you don't want to have to click that run button every time, all you have to do is do Shift Enter, and that will run a cell. Again, that's Shift Enter to run a cell. If you just hit Enter by itself, you'll just create more new lines. So it's Shift Enter to run a cell. There's lots of other useful hotkeys where you can click on Help and then hit Keyboard Shortcuts, and it will list all the keyboard shortcuts. The most useful ones we'll be teaching you later on, but you can always explore that yourself. Now we also discussed that the notebook system can actually hold markdown text. That is just normal text that is not code that you can just use for yourself to type out notes as you're learning throughout this bootcamp. So if you click on a cell, you'll notice here it says code, and that's because this is currently a Python code cell. If you want to make it into just a normal markdown cell, select from this dropdown Markdown, and now this is no longer a code cell, it's just a cell that will just have normal text in it. And you'll notice that it no longer has this in right in front of the cell, so that also indicates that it's just for normal text. So here you can write yourself just notes that will help you understand, and if you do Shift Enter, it will then display them as just a normal text. So again, this is no longer code, it's just text for yourself. And a lot of the notebooks we provide throughout your training will have markdown text as explanation. And if you ever want to write another code cell, you can just hit on a cell and then make sure that it's selected code. And you should be able to print whatever you want here. Shift Enter to run it, and that's the very basics. We'll be talking a lot more about notebooks later on throughout your training, but that's really the basics. The last thing I want to note is that this special extension of the notebook file, this .ipynb, means that you actually can't double click on this file on your computer and expect it to open. So let me show you what I mean by that very quickly. You'll notice that if I come to my desktop, I can see here my example.py, and if I double click on this, it will actually open up in whatever default program I have for it, typically Sublime Text Editor or whatever other editors you have on your computer. So you can double click on .py files, edit them, and work with them. However, if you try double clicking on a .ipynb file, you'll end up getting something asking you, how do you want to open this file? Or it will just kind of open up and you'll just see a bunch of scrambled code. That means that you can only open these special notebook files through the Jupyter Notebook system. So you'll have to open up Anaconda Navigator, launch a Jupyter Notebook, and then actually find it throughout your computer and click on it. All right, that's the very basics of running Python code. It's time to actually learn Python. Hi everyone, I just wanted to take this lecture to very quickly show you how you can download the course notebooks and open them on your computer in case you're having any issues with that. If you've already been able to do that just from the links from the FAQ lecture or the course overview lecture, feel free to skip this lecture. But basically all I'm going to do here is show you how you can actually download the notes from our GitHub page. So you should have seen a little blue pop up with a resource link, and that resource link will take you to the GitHub page for Purion Data and the Complete Python 3 Bootcamp. So go to this resource link. You can either type it in manually, Google search it, or just use the little blue pop-up that happened when you were watching this lecture. So let's hop over to that link. Okay, so here we are at that GitHub repository, and this is basically an online repository that you can access in order to get the actual course notes. You'll see here how the course notes are organized. We basically have it numbered off by section, and then inside of these sections you'll see the notebooks themselves, and the notebooks are titled both so that their lecture title matches as best we could with the notebook title, and then we also have them kind of numbered so you can go through them in order. So for example, when you're learning about for loops, you'll go ahead and click here on for loops, and this will eventually load up the notebook. Notice how it's a .ipynb file. But once you have the notebook loaded, you should see lots of useful information here, and then the actual code itself. Now, if you want to run these notebooks onto your computer, what you need to do is download this repository. So we'll come back here, click on Complete Python 3 Bootcamp, and there's different ways you can download this repository. If you're already familiar with Git, you can feel free to fork this repository and then have it on your own GitHub. Keep in mind, we are constantly updating this. But what you can do also to just get the files locally is click here where it says clone or download, and then click on download zip, and that will download a zip file which you can then unzip, and that will have all the .ipynb files that you can then access using your Anaconda Navigator, as we showed in the Running Python Code lecture. Alright, that's just a very quick overview of how to get the notes. If you ever have any questions on this, feel free to post the Q&A forums, but definitely check out the FAQ lecture where we have more detailed instructions on how to do all this. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll see you at the next lecture. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Git and GitHub overview lecture. So in this lecture, we'll just get a quick overview on Git and GitHub in general. So what is Git, G-I-T? Git is a free and open source distributed version control system, and it can handle everything from just a small project to a really large one pretty well. So you can go ahead and go to git-scm.com to learn more about Git, and you can try it in your browser for free by clicking this try Git link on the Git page here, and it'll take you to this link at try.github.io, and it'll teach you Git pretty quickly in your browser. So it's actually a really useful tool. So what kind of companies are using Git, this version control system? Pretty much all major companies such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. There's a whole list of companies. Many companies use Git, and you might be wondering what's the difference between Git and GitHub. So GitHub is a web page where you can publish your Git repositories and collaborate with other people. So as I mentioned before, Git's a version control system. So it basically has a series of snapshots of your code, which are known as commits. And as you see the path of the snapshots, you can check what order they're created in. So can you use Git without GitHub is another question people ask. And yes, so Git runs locally if you don't use GitHub. An alternative to GitHub might be using Git with your files and then hosting them on Dropbox. But GitHub is the de facto and most popular streamlined service that's designed especially for Git. So I encourage you to make your own GitHub account and check it out. I have my own GitHub account, and that's where I commit the repositories for the notebooks, and that's how you're able to view them. It's because I'm pushing them to GitHub. If you're interested in working how GitHub works, you can go to guides.github.com/activities/hello-world. Again, this link is in the lecture text. And you can check out their Hello World document. It's all in browser, so again, you don't need to download anything. You can just check it out all there. And then another great website for learning Git in general, just Git Git, is gitimmersion.com. And it works for both Mac and Windows. Okay, so that's just a brief overview on Git and version control in general, the links and resources you need to learn more about them. Don't worry if you don't want to check that out right now. Later on in the lecture, we'll touch again on this topic when we talk about modules and importing and creating your own libraries. All right, that's it for this lecture. Up next, we'll finally get started with Python object and data structure basics. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.